So, good morning. Please take your seat. In a few minutes we will start. So, good morning again. I hope you are fine, well. Okay. So we are ready to start the third and the final session of the Isufi Summer Excellence School. Just a few minutes to recap something in order to contextualize ourselves in the mood of the summer school and in regard of course, of the objective of the summer school. So yesterday, we was inspired by theoretical and practical insights related to interdisciplinary and transdisciplinarity. So how to move when we want working in an integrated research framework. Just to explain you why we yesterday organized a round table in the framework of this summer school, a round table on a specific problem, so the fight to illicit trafficking of cultural properties, because it was an example of a specific method to apply the interdisciplinary approach. The method, in particular, was one of the dialogue-based method for research integration. Specifically, the method is called Consensus Development Panel. Among other methods we have to apply the interdisciplinary approach. That method requires, as you can read from the program of the summer school, first to review the context. So we had the talks of different experts. First of all, on the topic of technology, because the technology was the focus of the round table, how technology could help to make the fight to illicit trafficking more effective. This was the question mark of the research question of the round table. And the method includes, so first, a review of the state of art done by expert, okay? Then a judgment of the review by stakeholder, other stakeholder. So UNESCO and ICOM had that task in the situation. Then the third step is to analyze gaps and challenges. So we had the other group of speakers, academics and professionals, coming from the different knowledge area, so to discuss about gap and challenges, with the final aim, so the last step, to synthesize and to come to a common statement. This is the point, the final point. So, what is the common statement of yesterday, of the round table? This is a question for you. What do you think? Maybe I can say that, of course, Professoressa Lazzaretti made the synthesis, a strong synthesis. But at the end, the answer to the research question we put at the round table, so the dialogue, I think is that we can agree on the fact that before speaking about technology, maybe we can reframe the problem at the core of the phenomenon. And this can be a result of the method, okay? Just to give you, but if you want to deep your knowledge in this type of method, or interdisciplinary method, based on dialogue, there are different methods. I can suggest you some references, okay? So write me. Then today, we'll try to add other methods with the objective to reach an integrated research framework. This is our aim, okay? And in particular, today, we have three very interesting talks that I think that will add something else to our learning process of these 2 days of the summer school. And in particular, I think that we can understand better also the differences between interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, right? Okay, perfect. And we will try to explain, so I'm asking speakers, please, to focus more on the methods used in your project, your experience, in order to highlight how we can, we all can learn how to make interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary more practical, okay? So methods, please. Okay, well, is it it is time to start. So we have the first speaker, Stephanie Brewers, is online, so she will deliver her talk online. Stephanie is there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Hi, Stephanie. Thank you very much for your availability. Just a few words about you. So Stephanie Brewers is a transdisciplinary researcher who works on projects that require creative and innovative approaches to solve wicked problems, bringing in design and the arts wherever possible. Stephanie comes from the Transdisciplinary Lab from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, right? Stephanie, please correct me if I'm wrong. So, Stephanie, if you are ready, we are ready too, and the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you very much. All right, I will begin by sharing my screen. So let me just do that, find the appropriate one. Okay, and then I begin my presentation.
So when you are, okay, so when you are ready, you have 45 minutes.
Okay, and the presentation is visible and everything?
Yes, it's okay. So I can see you, but the slide, yes. Maybe, I don't know if you could set your screen in order to see you and the slide.
I don't know how to do that with Google Meets. I'm used to being on Zoom, so.
Or maybe, okay, it's okay, in a way, okay?
Okay, I'm sorry about that. All right, good morning, everybody. And I'm sorry that I cannot be there in person. I would really have loved to be there in person, but at the moment I am in South Africa, which is my home country. And my group lead, Bianca, is on holiday, so therefore both of us could not be there in person, unfortunately. But today I will be telling you about the Diamond Project as a case study for interdisciplinarity and actually transdisciplinarity. So I have already been introduced. I'm an architect and an urbanist, and I've been working on the Diamond Project for 1.5 years now. And I'm also working on another energy modeling project called COSY, where we focus on the Swiss energy transition and how to integrate social science and humanities into the Swiss energy transition. But today we'll be focusing on Diamond, and I'll get to what Diamond is in a small while. So I'll present the project. We'll have 5 minutes of questions if you have any questions about the project, and then I will go through the joint problem framing approach that we're using in Diamond, and then I'll focus a little bit on transdisciplinary principles in Diamond, and ending off with some questions. So today we will be talking about models, and you might think if we talk about architectural models, as I do when being an architect, or fashion models potentially, climate models could be getting closer. But we'll be talking about something called integrated assessment models. And now I don't know the mix of students we have at the summer school. So some of you may already know what an integrated assessment model is. But I'm going to treat you as newbies today, just as I was 1.5 years ago, and explain to you a little bit what integrated assessment models are. And yeah, the reason why I also showed an architecture model and a fashion model and a climate model is also just to highlight the importance of language and the use of language and the use of clarification whenever you use terms, right? We all have a different idea and picture in our heads when we're speaking about something, and we assume that the other understands what we mean, and that's never the case, really. So integrated assessment models, what are they? So these are computer simulations describing interactions between climate and society. And they aim to provide policy relevant insights on climate change and sustainable development issues with quantitative descriptions. So they work with numbers on processes and interactions between human systems and earth systems. So they're integrated because they use many different scientific disciplines, many different data sets, and they integrate this kind of interaction between human system and earth systems. And then they make an assessment, which is generally used for information for policy decision making around climate change and climate policies to meet those targets, such as the 2-degree target.
Sorry, Stephanie, please. Excuse me, Stephanie, but your slides are not running. So
They are not running.
No.
Okay, they are running on my computer.
Okay, now yes.
Now yes. Now you now you see the slides on the side as well, no?
I don't know.
Sorry.
So okay, we'll try to move on.
Let me quickly try something. If I just make this smaller and I do it like that, you can see the slide. It's not so pretty, but is it visible? You can see? Hello? Can I continue?
Yes, Stephanie, please. You can continue now.
Okay. Okay, so you can see my slide now. Sorry that it's not presented perfectly. So yes, integrated assessment models are used to make or to help and assist climate decision makers to make decisions around climate policy to meet their targets, such as net zero sustainable development or meeting the 2-degree targets set in the Paris Agreement. So this is the kind of diagram of what an integrated assessment model is. As you can see, they represent different areas. So some of them will represent more SDGs, or some of them will represent policies, others don't. And they also represent different geographic coverage. So this is one model that we work with, for example, the Gemini E3 model. And this is another example of a model that we work with. And as you can see, there's different kinds of representation in each model. And so the target point of integrated assessment models is exactly here in the middle between, first of all, society and policy. And then within that, what is technologically feasible? The kinds of advice that the models are giving to policymakers need to be technologically feasible. They need to be relevant for policy, but they also need to be acceptable by society. And it's really in the intersection of all these things where integrated assessment models try to focus and try to aim. So integrated assessment models also work with scenarios, and scenarios can be thought of as a kind of possibility space for climate action, where they predict different possibilities and different consequences in our future society. And politicians use these projections to inform their policy decision making. But it's really important to remember that these models are projections and not predictions. And this is a very common problem with stakeholders who engage in modeling, is that they expect the models to give them the answer to all their problems. And this really just is not the case. So these models face all sorts of criticisms, and I'm sorry the slide was animated, but now it will just be visible like this. And the gaps and criticisms in models are largely around technical feasibility, which is really complicated to represent certain things like physical impacts and adaptations, and representing things like the sustainability goals within the models, cross-sectoral interactions, for example. These things are really, really technically very complex to to represent in a model, also because the models become really, really heavy very quickly, and they need to make certain trade-offs to be able to represent these sorts of things. The legitimacy of models is often also questioned, often because there's certain assumptions that are made, and policymakers and stakeholders often don't understand the models very well. So legitimacy is a large problem and a gap within integrated assessment models, which leads also to ownership and openness. So when these models are, I'll first speak about openness. Because these models aren't completely open, they're perceived a bit as a black box, and stakeholders don't really trust what is going on there. And a big gap is that the models are not open access. Often the data sets are not open access, and one cannot really see the mechanisms behind the models and understand those mechanisms in an open and transparent way. And then finally, the ownership is a big issue of who owns the model, who owns the data of these models, and that also causes a large barrier for these models and the potential that these models present in decision making. So the Diamond project is exactly trying to address these gaps in integrated assessment models, and this is the project that I'm working on. And Diamond stands for delivering the next generation of open, important open, integrated assessment models for net zero and sustainable development. And the Diamond project is spanning from December 22 until November 26. So it's a 4-year-long project with 19 partners across Europe, the US, Canada, and the UK. And our position in the Diamond project is to co-design model developments using a transdisciplinary approach, which I will get back to. So this is a map showing the representation of all the different partners across Europe and the rest of the world. As you can see, we have really a large consortium, and within each of those partner organizations, we have several people and researchers that are represented there. So in total, we have about 70 plus researchers working on Diamond, which excludes the stakeholders. So Diamond's interdisciplinarity, or let's rather say transdisciplinarity, is represented here. So some of our partners, for example, are experts in policy research, in circular economy, psychology, macroeconomics. There are many engineers working on the models. We have a really, really diverse interdisciplinary team on the one hand, and then on our stakeholder side, we have stakeholders like climate decision makers, climate action NGOs, and citizen associations who have a high interest in the models and the results they produce. We also have industry and sectoral experts who are very important in informing the models on what current trends are in industry, how industry is responding to certain policies that are being implemented by government. And then also we have researchers where we're trying to build a community of practice around best practice in integrated assessment modeling. How can we also learn from other researchers and also inform other researchers through our project? So these are the objectives of Diamond. So the first objective is to update the models. We work with 6 integrated assessment models. And the second goal is to enhance the model capability. And here we start to integrate and link in other models like a behavioral model or an economic model into the integrated assessment model to enhance the capacity. Then we want to create a robust, fully integrated assessment framework. We want to expand the scenario space and uncertainty spectrum by making these scenarios much more applicable to everyday life realities. We also want to open the models and make transparent their enhancements and their developments. And then finally, which is the very important part for us, is to develop a transdisciplinary approach to co-create the research questions that are driving all of these other objectives that you see above. So why are we doing a transdisciplinary approach? So integrated assessment models are being very much increasingly used to inform policy decision making. And because of that, they are being increasingly criticized. And these criticisms can be dealt with in participatory modeling, which is becoming an approach that more and more integrated assessment models are adopting. And within the framework of participatory modeling, modeling groups are starting to use an increasingly transdisciplinary approach to model. And this is in an attempt to kind of try and address all these criticisms around integrated assessment models. So this is the co-design work package that you can see that ETH is co-leading with Isinova, another organization based in Rome. And you can see that the co-design work package is a sort of umbrella work package that aims to guide all the different work packages below that, with the scenario work package, the work package that is integrating other models into the integrated assessment models, and the work package where the actual integrated assessment models are based. And within this co-design work package, we aim to reach a mutual understanding first, co-produce knowledge second, and finally have model co-ownership. And these three steps are very standard steps in the transdisciplinary approach, where we first jointly frame a problem, which I will get to in a second. We then co-produce knowledge, and we then own that knowledge by actually making it practically applicable in policy and in reality. So here we go. This is our co-design approach. So within the mutual understanding phase, which is the first phase of transdisciplinary research as well, we have three different steps or stages within that. And the first is to familiarize ourselves with the project and with the problem space. The second is to understand stakeholder engagement, how we will engage stakeholders. And the third is to start integrating stakeholder perspectives. And the reason why we only integrate stakeholder perspectives towards the end is because we want to make sure that we are adequately prepared to approach stakeholders so that we don't waste the stakeholders' time, especially, so that we have a clear vision and a clear approach and jointly framed problem from our side that we can approach the stakeholders to, and then integrate their perspectives that then adapt our jointly framed problem. This is really important because stakeholders are often very busy, and if we come with mixed messages and if we're not clear on our side, it really kind of dilutes the power of stakeholder engagement. And so the next phase is co-production, as I've already said, where we have a series of stakeholder engagement activities to co-produce the knowledge around the integrated assessment models. And finally, we have co-ownership, where we integrate and apply the co-produced knowledge into societal and scientific practices. So I will now speak about our first part, which is joint problem framing. It's this first phase that we're following to reach mutual understanding, and we're using a joint problem framing approach for that. So what is joint problem framing? So we have Bin Pierce with us today, which is really great because she wrote a very important paper about this exact approach called joint problem framing. And in her paper, she defines it as a process of eliciting, searching, and selecting relevant perspectives that restructure one's perception of a situation to determine the appropriate goals and criteria for the creation of effective solutions. So another definition that I really like to integrate into the Diamond Project is Borden and Crick's definition on joint problem framing. And they feel it is a reflexive mode of integration. So it really requires you to reflect, to understand your own position within a project. And so this aims to integrate and capture the complexity of real world problems in a methodologically controlled way, so that you have all the different diversities of perspectives within a project brought together and linked in an integral way without actually dissolving those differences. So you don't need to all come to one single agreement on the way forward, but as long as your different perspectives are well integrated with one another within this kind of problem space, you are already in a much better way and a better space to start co-producing knowledge. So when do we need joint problem framing? This is again from Bin Pierce's paper, where they define joint problem framing necessary when you have a wicked problem. And a wicked problem is a problem that is both complex and ill-structured. And Diamond is right about there. And this is normally also the domain of sustainability that you deal with, where the problems have many different solutions and they are highly complex to understand what is going on. And so Diamond has a kind of double wicked problem, which is on the one hand, dealing with climate change, and on the other hand, that models are incredibly complex as well. So we'll go through the different stages of joint problem framing as defined by Pearson et Jean. So the first stage is understanding the small scale models that form the problem situation. So these small scale models are basically like what is going on in my head versus what is going on in your head. So it's individuals, environments that they've been in, their experiences, their interests, and their knowledge. And each one of us has the set of experiences, interests, knowledge that have shaped our perception. And so we need to first understand all the different mental models, small scale mental models that exist within the project. The next step, so this is an example of the first step that we did with students actually around the Diamond Project. To show you the Diamond Project's a bit too complex because we have a very iterative process, and the students in our integration course deal with the Diamond data in a much more simplified way, so it's much easier to use them to explain this process. So here they've taken some small sticky notes that were developed by the Diamond partners, and they are trying to understand the small scale models here and trying to sort the different sticky notes out and understand the different perceptions in the project. So the second stage that we have, once we all understand a little bit the different small scale models, is start to elicit, clarify, reconfigure, and reconcile, so organizing essentially all those different mental models to form a problem space and a problem frame. So you can see from the one hand, it's unorganized, it's chaotic, and in the next step, you start to really frame the problem where each of those small scale models starts to relate and interact with the other. And here you have that approach that the students did. So some of the students looked at the stakeholder perspective, some of them looked at the modeling perspective, and some of them looked at the project mission perspective. And they reconfigured and reorganized all of those different stickies. And then the final step is to identify the needs, the goals, and the limitations of the problem space and of the problem frame. So you can take the problem frame and you can then understand what are the next steps going forward. We didn't really define the next steps going forward in our exercise with students, but what we did do is we tried to take all the different problem frames that all the different groups developed, and we made one jointly framed problem statement which would guide the project essentially, and I will show you that in this next slide. So here we have the project mission statement on the one hand, then we have the modeler's problem statement on the other hand, and we have the stakeholder statement on the other hand. And these three different statements then were looked at together. So all the groups came together, they started highlighting commonalities, they started highlighting what is the most important in their problem statements, and you can see all the different sketching and words and things that came together. And ultimately, we developed one single statement that you can find here, which is how can we increase meaningful communication, this is a stakeholder side, between diverse stakeholders to make more mutual understanding and accurate models. So this is the modeler's perspective in terms of the model process, the content in the model, and the output of the model, to advise policymakers to adapt to and mitigate climate change. And the project mission is to adapt to and mitigate climate change. So it's a complex and chunky statement, which often these statements are complex and chunky because they need to include a lot of different things. But ultimately, it shows you how you can come from having different perspectives and you come together at the end of the day to have one single statement that identifies and frames your problem. And the next step would be to look at the needs, the goals, and the limitations that then sets you forward into the knowledge co-production phase. So I'm ending off over there. because that is at the moment where we are in the Diamond project. We will begin to co-produce our knowledge towards the end of the year. At the moment, we are in the final phase of joint problem framing, where we are starting to incorporate the stakeholder perspectives into our jointly framed problems. And the Diamond goal is to have a set of research questions as an output. So rather than problem statements that I just present, it will be slightly different. It would be in the form of a research question. And that is our goal, to have at the end of the jointly problem framing phase that we're in right now, is to have jointly created research questions that guide the next phase of Diamond. So in this process of joint problem framing that's been happening in the last year in Diamond, I also did a lot of observation around transdisciplinarity in integrated assessment models. And I hosted a series of 7 in-person workshops with the modelers to actually, as a first stage of a transdisciplinary process, to really get to know the teams on a personal level before moving online, because that's actually another major complexity in transdisciplinary research nowadays, is that you have to do things online. You often have a very large geographically dispersed team. And so we made the decision that we would first have in-person workshops, get to know people personally, and from then onwards we move online, because it is much more sustainable to be online. So in this process, I had also had 2 online workshops, and I did a series of mapping of the different sticky notes and the different kind of data that was produced in these workshops. And these were coded and categorized under about 180 different keywords. And so from these keywords, I started to reflect a little bit on how integrated assessment modelers are actually perceiving transdisciplinary research and practicing transdisciplinary research. And this is what I will present in this last little section of my presentation. So this is just a statement that I got in one of my first visits, which is from a modeler who said, when you refer to TD, you do mean top down, right? And it was again a lesson to me to not always assume that everybody understands what transdisciplinary research is, and therefore what TD even means, even though we have an entire work package dedicated to TD research in Diamond. And so I realized that TD know-how can indeed, and is trying to in Diamond, tackle the many criticisms and challenges that integrated assessment model face at a more systemic level, rather than at a surface level of, being more participatory and integrating stakeholders more into the process, which is what they're trying to do right now. It appears that this is not systemic enough, and TD know-how could make their transdisciplinary approach much more systemic. But the problem is that developing an understanding of transdisciplinarity can require quite a lot of effort from researchers who are indeed interested, but they just don't have the time or the capacity to get to know what TD is all about and what are the different principles that guide transdisciplinary research. And so the lack of easy to grasp guidelines to execute this co-productive approach can often hinder the increasing commitments to transdisciplinary approaches that large organizations like Horizon are funding and are pushing for transdisciplinary approaches. So we need to make transdisciplinarity more accessible in integrated assessment modeling, and also, this is just a case study, but also in large consortiums in general. And how have I done this? And this is a paper that I'm working on at the moment. Well, we reviewed the most important transdisciplinary principles in the literature. We then broke down the principles into easy to grasp language. And then finally, we went and reflected on how these principles are being perceived in Diamond and in integrated assessment models. And finally, we wanted to understand which principles therefore need to be strengthened in integrated assessment modeling so that the TD approach can be much more systemic. So these are some of the principles. Again, the slide was supposed to be animated, so I'm revealing all my secrets here. But I'll just speak through the principles very briefly. So we firstly have altruistic principles, which is a motive of bettering society and the planet. We then have this principle of a project being having a wicked problem. And the project is often largely context-based. So it has very specific conditions, very specific actors that are influencing this wicked problem definition. Then the project approach is often at a very systemic level, aiming to have in-depth understandings of the root causes of the problem. There's always an involvement of scientific and non-scientific actors, and these actors are people who are affected by the problem or who do affect the problem. TD research is largely integrative, so it builds, it blends, it transforms knowledge and incorporates many different components into solutions for policy and practice. It is also a largely reflexive process, where you collectively and individually reflect on and evolve your position and your perception related to the project and its actors. It's also pluralistic, which means it captures and coherently maintains different perspectives, as I had defined previously in my presentation. All these different perspectives are kept in unison within the project problem definition and solution space. It's also iterative, which means it's non-linear, it's cyclical, and as new understandings develop within the project, you might have to go back a few steps and incorporate this new perspective into your problem definition and solution space. And trust building is a very important part of the TD approach, where you create an environment where people can be open, actors can express their perspectives and their needs during this problem and solution space. And then finally, the outcome is normally, the result is normally that it increases legitimacy and ownership. So project outcomes are applicable, they're relevant, they're valued, and they feel like the stakeholders feel like they own that solution, and therefore the uptake of the solutions is much higher in the real world, let's say. And finally, TD projects are aimed to be transformative. So they really intend to induce change, and they want to change certain conditions either through knowledge production, through coming up with an effective solution, or through coming up with a much more in-depth understanding, let's say, of a complex wicked problem. And so as you can see, all these principles were previously just sort of shuffled in one large body of literature, but I then broke these down into project-based principles, process-based principles, and outcome-based principles. So project-based principles are principles that guide the project, that ground the project. So these are the kinds of principles that are there from the get-go. They're there right from the beginning. And whenever you feel like you're losing track of what you're doing because this problem is so complex and things are so complicated, you go back to your grounding principles. You go back to what is the altruistic reason for doing this project? What is the wicked problem we're really trying to deal with? And within what context are we working here? And so this runs from the beginning throughout the project to ground you. Then you have your process principles, which guides your project. Throughout the project, you use these sorts of principles. You work in an integrative way, you work in an iterative way, you're reflexive, etc., etc. And then finally, you have your outcome principles. This is the destination of the project. What are you actually trying to do here at the end of the day? And this is being transformative. You're trying to solve a problem, you're trying to transform a certain situation, and you're trying to create legitimacy of those solutions so that they actually are applicable to this problem. So to show you a little bit how these principles are being perceived in Diamond, these are the kinds of maps that I produced from my focus groups that I spoke of earlier. And this example is the map around the Diamond mission. What is Diamond actually trying to do? So this altruistic principle that I've spoken about. And here I had many different keywords that I mapped out. And you can see one of the quotes here, for example, is from a participant that Diamond's mission is climate change or to address climate change and its environmental and societal impact. Here is another example of the mappings that I did, and this is a mapping largely around stakeholder engagement approaches. And you can see it's incredibly complex. It has many different tags and connections and sticky notes. But again, one of the quotes that represent here the Diamond Partners' perception of this principle of involving scientific and non-scientific actors. One of the participants says here, not represented groups are needed, especially citizens and climate skeptics. There are many extremities and viewpoints, and we need a balanced overview. So they're afraid of models being biased towards one particular stakeholder group. So from these large maps, as I said, I had about 180 different keywords, and I then went and looked at these keywords and looked at which principles do these keywords relate to. And so here you can see in the systemic principle, there weren't actually any keywords that related there. In the integrative principle, linking models was the main form of integration that modelers really thought of. So it's kind of a very technical approach to integration. How do we integrate one model into another model? How do we integrate different data sets? Or how can we soft link or hard link the economic model into this integrated assessment model? It's a highly technical perception of integration. Then the reflexive principle, modelers spoke a lot or reflected a lot about the problems around assumptions in models, and that these assumptions are often not well communicated with stakeholders. They also spoke about limitations and trade-offs and reflected a lot on that. In terms of trust building, they spoke a lot about the issues of black boxes, models that are not open and transparent, and that capacity building is needed. Iterative, they look at iteration in terms of getting feedback and validation from stakeholders, but they really complain that there's not enough time. So yeah, I'm not going to go through all of these because I think I'm running out of time. We also started a little bit late, but you can see in scientific and non-scientific actors, that principle was, people really spoke a lot about all of these different elements: society, industry, inclusivity, coordination, the importance of coordination. And yes, in legitimacy and ownership, this is really important for modelers. They want their results to be acceptable, to be feasible, and to influence policies in climate change. And they also are highly focused on having transformative impact, so looking for solutions and strategies and insights to help policy and decision making. And indeed, the models are highly altruistic. They focus on climate change and on net zero emissions and sustainable development. And in terms of wicked problems, they are definitely looking at very context-based, sorry, that's contextual. They're looking at real world uncertainty, and the models are also very complex, and the real world is also very complex. So it's complexity on two levels that they're dealing with. And in terms of contextuality, yes, the models are highly contextual because they deal with very specific problems. They deal with very specific regions, whether it's European-based models or global models. So that is to show you a little bit of an overview of how these models are speaking about, or how these modelers are speaking about transdisciplinary principles. And then this is my second last slide, is to show a little bit where attention is needed in these principles in integrated assessment modeling. And as you can see, there's one that's highlighted in red, and that is systemic. It appears that modelers are not thinking so much about integrated assessment models at a very systemic level. They are very end goal oriented and solution oriented, which is fine. But often in transdisciplinary processes, one really needs to focus on the systemic problem space and understanding exactly what is the problem before focusing on the solution and how can we fix this. And there's a little bit of a solution-heavy focus in modeling, and so I do think that systemic area needs to be addressed and needs to be the focus needs to be increased a little bit there. And then the ones highlighted in yellow also need attention. That models need to be integrative in a less technical way, and also in integrating different perspectives and different bodies of knowledge, for example. And so yes, you can see here that there are for sure different areas that the modelers can focus on to have a much more authentic and let's say transdisciplinary approach to their participatory modeling. And so this is my final slide before I finish off. So addressing these blind spots in TD approaches can aid in addressing the criticisms and gaps that are presented in models, producing integrated assessment models that are much more accepted and trusted in the decision-making process, ultimately to address climate change. So we can have some questions now. I'll first just finish off by saying, if you need to contact me or anything, this is my email address or my group lead's email address. We're based at the TD Lab. And if you want to know more about the project, here are some links. I'll leave this slide up while we answer some questions. Thank you.
So thank you, Stephanie. Perfectly in time. Thank you for this. And very interesting your talk. I totally agree with your thoughts and your project results. I apply a similar approach to my projects. So I think that concluding your talk, maybe I'm wrong, so please correct me if I don't understood well. That applying transdisciplinary implies stakeholder engagement, right? In the research process, yes, I think. But stakeholder engagement, yes. Okay. Stakeholder engagement requires also participatory techniques to use in order to reach that mutual understanding and the alignment to the same objectives, to the same goal. Participatory techniques that imply for the researcher specific skills, I suppose.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, thank you. Maybe will any comments or question? We move them to the QA session at the end of the other presentation. And now, Bim Bim Peers. Hi, Bim Bim. Bim Bim comes from the Delft University of Technology, Netherlands. And Bim Bim Peers is an assistant professor for policy analysis and design. She's the coordinator of the Horizon 2020 project Energy Citizens for Inclusive Decarbonization. And the title of her talk is Energy Citizen for Inclusive Decarbonization. So the floor is yours. Thank you. Now, just a few minutes. Now? No, no. You are.
Now it's okay.
Okay.
Oh.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here. It's really has been a pleasure. I'm going to thank again to Francesca. I don't know how you're still up here and looking so fresh. You have so much on your plate. So thank you so much for all the beautiful things you've done for us.
You're welcome.
Yeah, very, very much lovely event. And also Salvatore. I have to say, I didn't know anything about this region. It was all quite a mystery to me, but I'm so glad I came. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And maybe a round of applause for all the hard work that you've done, especially.
Thank you.
A lot of emails I sent her, so I know how many emails you would have gotten in total from everybody. So, and also, look, it's been a pleasure to have the conversations I've been able to have with all of you. You are some of the brightest students I've had the pleasure of having conversations with. So it's really, sorry? Yes. It's really been really as an educator and as as a person who likes being with students, it's really a treat. So thank you all of you for being so open and attentive to all these talks. It's also not easy to sit hour after hour, but you've done a great job. So to get on to what I was about to talk about, I'm really glad Stephanie laid sort of some of the foundations of what I'll discuss now as well. She mentioned a lot about, in a different way, also some of the similar topics I will talk about. So I like to offer you a challenge as you are listening to my talk and also Maria Helena's talk, which is, can you find the links and connections between maybe different terms that have been used to discuss the same concepts? Because that's one of the potentially confusing things is that we're all talking about essentially the same things, but because we are coming from different fields, we use slightly different terms. Now, my task to you is if you can find, because you're also bright, the clusters of terms that you can make the distinction that even though I'm slightly using different terms, if we're actually talking about the same thing, okay? So afterwards, at lunch, you can tell me what you discovered, but see if you can find the red thread for yourself starting from Rick's talk to Gabriella's to what Stephanie just said to my talk and later on. What is that red thread? Maybe find one thing that's important for you. What is one insight that you would have derived from all of these talks, okay? So do a little integration in your own mind, and you can do it because you have great brains, okay? So I will be talking, as Francesca asked, about the application of some of the TD, of the transdisciplinarity principles in a project setting. So yesterday, you really got exposed to a complex problem and how different types of perspectives were integrated in a topic. So today, what's different is that you're seeing how this integration happens in a project, in 3 separate projects. So the scale will be a little bit smaller, it'll be a little bit more graspable about how we use transdisciplinary principles in these settings. I will first start with a broad overview of what the project is about. Then I will use a structure for talking about what is transdisciplinary research and apply each of those principles in the project itself. I will end with some ideas about what the outputs of the project are, and then offer you a last glimpse into, I have something, a little bit of a surprise at the end to have you see and assess for yourself what does it really mean for transdisciplinary work to be taken out into the world. So, project that we're talking about right now is about energy citizenship. Most people have never heard of this term. Even I, maybe 4 years ago, have never heard of this term. But now I lead the project about energy citizenship. And we do 3 things, Only 3 things in the project. And that is, first of all, define what energy citizenship is. What is this strange term? Secondly, we ask the question, is this a useful term for especially modeling? So does it have any relevance in when we talk about decarbonization and decarbonization potential? And is it usable in the models that Stephanie was talking about? Does it have any application in integrated assessment model, for example, or energy modeling? And the third thing we do, which is really part of the transdisciplinary part of the transdisciplinary project, is we try to mobilize energy citizenship. So we define it, we operationalize it, and then we try to mobilize it through what we call educational co-creation, but that's also very, I'll get into what that means. Before we get into details, let's start with the foundations. Why are we doing this project? And the starting point is, look, in the energy transition, you're probably very aware of it, in which we're trying to decrease carbon emissions, right? You have heard of net zero goals, if you're at all, kind of in line with what's happening in the EU. The starting point is, all right, we've done all this work in technology, we have all the technology, but why isn't it that we're still making the strides that we need to make, right? It's kind of a strange thing. We have money, we have technology, it's not moving fast enough. So the starting point and why the EU funded us is to figure out if technological solutions on their own are not enough, then what else? And our hypothesis is that social innovation individual and collective action are also needed to influence and realize system-level changes. And this is the systemic part that Stephanie was also talking about, right? How do we actually transform the entire system? So the conclusion or the guess is that, okay, we need some catalysts. We really need some catalysts for this societal level transformation, because it's no less than a societal transformation that we're asking for. So then what is energy citizenship? Here's a simple definition. It's just citizen engagement and participation in the energy transition. It's very broadly defined. But what it focuses on is asking the question, how do we balance right and responsibilities, and how do we do that amongst different stakeholders within the energy system while change is happening, right? So it's still a very broad concept. You know, it's something about energy, it's something about citizens, it's something about transformation, and what role all of us have to play in that transformation. So, therefore, I can also translate the 3 goals of our projects into 3 very basic questions. So it's about who are energy citizens, right? Because we have to define what energy citizenship in order to know who. It's how do citizens become energy citizens? Is that possible? Does it matter? And the third question is when and where can energy citizens create change? Those are kind of our mysteries that we started with. These are questions. All right. So now you know my starting point, the why of why the project is happening. And I'd like to also now make the claim that our project is indeed a transdisciplinary one. Note that this is a research and innovation action. It's a type of Horizon project where they ask us to do research equally as they ask us to actually make some change in society. But I think we've talked about transdisciplinarity a lot, but maybe I offer also my definition of what it is and why it's a little bit confusing, this term. And everybody uses it. Maybe it's a little bit overused. Let's be honest. It's overused. So why is it overused, and how can we get a little bit more clarity around it? I think first and foremost, to clear up some of the air, I think transdisciplinarity is not one thing. It's not like one sentence that you can say, this is transdisciplinarity, because it of itself has many different faces. And I'm arguing that transdisciplinarity has 4 aspects to it. Transdisciplinarity is the setting you're in. So we've been talking about the setting, right? What is context? Is this project transdisciplinary? So it's just the starting point. Is the starting point transdisciplinary? The second point is your mindset transdisciplinary? So this is about the principles that Stephanie was talking about. So what is your personal approach in conducting the research? Who are you going into the research? What kind of mindset do you have? So what I'm arguing is that if you don't have a transdisciplinary mindset, even if the project is transdisciplinary, maybe the outcome is actually not that, it's not so. So that's the second part. The third part is there's transdisciplinary processes and practices. This is oftentimes what we talk about, right? Because it's easy to point to, it's visible, it's tangible, it's easy to discuss with other people. And also it's easy to get some credit in the scientific community, right? Because you have tools, you have methods, therefore it's real. And so therefore we spend a lot of time on this, but it's only one aspect of transdisciplinarity. And the last but not least part of transdisciplinarity is its outputs. So are the outputs transdisciplinary? And oftentimes what you find is that in projects, they don't do any of the other parts that are transdisciplinary, but the outputs are transdisciplinary. You can argue whether or not that is so, but I think I'm just giving you, let's say, multiple lenses to judge for yourself in the future when you see a project. Is it transdisciplinary? Or maybe the better question is, how is it transdisciplinary? Not whether, but how, right? So I'm going to make use of these distinctions to talk through include as a specific example of that. So our setting for include is indeed, this is how I'm very simply actually defining the transdisciplinary setting, which is just whenever a set of academic objectives have to overlap with societal objectives. And this overlap has been defined in literature quite well. It's called Mode 2 science. And this is the type of science that's really directed by societal needs. That is in contrast to research, let's say, that comes from a pure curiosity of why and what is there, right? Not judging which is better, but this is a different type. So Mode 1 versus Mode 2. This reference I have here, it's in the reading list, so please follow up on that if you're interested. So we are indeed in a transdisciplinary setting and include. Why? Because we have academic objectives. We're trying to define what energy citizenship is, right? Okay, maybe most people don't care exactly what it is, but we do because we're researchers. And then we have the societal objectives very clearly. We want to mobilize energy citizenship. So that's very much working with people, making change in the world. But the overlap is, how do we use the energy citizenship concept to help us make decisions? That's the overlap between academic and societal objectives. And you see how I'm making this much more clean than what actually is. But you see how these different project objectives spread over these different types of academic and societal objectives. So that's the setting. I really like this paper, so if you're interested more on this topic, you can also explore a little bit more. I also like this paper because it talks about, it's by Papa, about that there are different forms of transdisciplinary research. So there's the descriptive analytical research, which is you're trying to use this research for creating a better knowledge base with other actors, right? So transdisciplinary research, you're co-producing knowledge because you think you can get better knowledge. That's what they call descriptive analytical research. But I think in Include, what we're doing is actually more towards transformational research. And that is defined by, we're mostly, motivated by arriving at a solution-oriented approach. So that's what we call transformational research, right? So even within transdisciplinary research, there's still distinctions, and I think it's very helpful also for me as a person being a part of this research to be very clear about what it is that we're doing and why. And the second part of it is that, okay, we did say, Francesca did ask the question, is it true that if you have stakeholders, it's transdisciplinary research? And the answer is yes, but then plus something else. The plus something else is not only that they're involved, but how are they involved? And I would argue that, and this paper argues that, you can include them for the purpose of being transparent and being participative. So that's about legitimacy, right? That's one role. But you can also include them for extending the community of knowledge producers so that you can actually attend to complexity, uncertainty, and the unknown unknowns that Gabrielle was talking about yesterday, right? So those are two different roles. Of course, they can overlap. So I would say there's a social role for the first one, and there's an epistemic role as the second one. And I think in Include, what we do is we really have more of a social role for actors rather than the epistemic one, to be very honest. I don't think we do very much with including stakeholders and extending a community of knowledge. Would have been great to do, but we didn't have time. So that is also setting the boundaries, what's actually possible, which is, I think that's a danger of transdisciplinary research. We want to do everything for everybody, but actually there's time limits. So what can we do in the time that we have? That's the setting. So then we go into mindsets. So, okay, I just explained what a transdisciplinary setting would be. So what are transdisciplinary mindsets? Okay, I give you a list, right? These are things very much related to the principles that Stephanie just presented. So you can look at her slides. They probably give you a better idea than my slides about the principles. But you see there's some overlaps, right? It's about being able to reflect about what you do, not only doing, just doing. It's about willingness to face ambiguity, about the possibility of failure. It's about actually being open to different ways of knowing. It's your intention, whether or not you can do it, but your intention that I want to contribute both to societal and scientific progress. And I would just like to say okay, it could just be a list of words, a list of really nice words and concepts that make you feel warm-hearted, but it really does have implications for how you actually run the project. So let me just give you an example. In Include, okay, this is very similar to the map. Actually, we have the same person who made the map for both projects. But there's the size issue. We have a large project, right? We have 13 partners. It's 40 months. The cost, da-da-da-da. So there's a complexity of cultural differences in ways of doing things. We have different sectors. So we have NGOs, we have SMEs, we have researching universities all working together. If we weren't open to each other's point of view, I don't think we could actually work together in these work packages, right? And then add on top of that, unpredictable circumstances. So when we started, COVID was still going on. So our kickoff in the first year and a half was all online. So all of this we have to overcome, And the transdisciplinary mindset really helped us to be okay with the fact that maybe some of the things we promise, it will have to be delayed or it has to be changed. And also, depending on how we organize the events that we do, we have to change everything. So I think this is oftentimes a reality of a part of what a transdisciplinary project is. You're working with people, you're working in the real world, so you have to roll along with the punches, basically. So that's just maybe a connection between what it means to have a particular mindset and how it looks like in the real world. And the mindset of being open to other ways of thinking really links back to what Rick was saying in terms of interdisciplinarity. Now, I'm making distinction here where I'm zooming in on what I mean is the difference between qualitative, quantitative methods and the scale at which certain methods are being applied. And what you see here in this bit small chart is that these are all of the 4 different types of methods that we use. Oh, sorry, that's more than 4. No, that's more than 4. 8 different types of methods that we use, maybe 8 out of the 12 that Rick was talking about. So we're engaging in all these methods. So in case you can't see, it's surveys, case study analysis, modified Delphi approach, interviews, machine learning clustering. And they range from, so if we weren't open to different ways of thinking, and weren't open in the way that Rick was talking about in terms of learning and borrowing theories and concepts of one another, the project wouldn't go. It just wouldn't go. And we wouldn't have even come up with the project proposal. So a lot of this also happens even before the project starts because we have to write together. So a lot of this integration happens already at the start of the project. This just gives you, and then the y-axis tells you that some of these methods, they lock you in to certain scales of analysis, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So, mindset. So we've talked about transdisciplinary setting, we've talked about the transdisciplinary mindset, what that could look like, what that could feel like, and the third thing is transdisciplinary processes and practices, and I think Stephanie really covered this very, very well. This is my simplification, which is very much similar to Stephanie's 3-step approach for what this transdisciplinary process is. And exactly as she said, it starts with joint problem framing, it goes on to co-creation of knowledge, then it goes into or integrating and applying co-created knowledge. So it's an idealized process, right? Not all transdisciplinary processes have these neat little boxes. In reality, they're mixed up. One arrow goes to another. It's very iterative. But this is a simplified way for us to discuss what are the different elements of these processes. And let me just take one story within our project to show you how these 3 boxes look like. So one of the products that we promise as a part of Include is the Include Interactive Platform. This is an online platform where we collect and make use of all the information that we have about energy citizenship, what it is, how to use it, da-da-da. So to do this, to create this platform, for the joint problem framing, we went to the Glasgow City Council. Primarily, we also talked with other city councils, like in the Netherlands and The Hague, and to understand, because they are our primary audience, we want to ask them, so if you're going online and you're using a platform, what kind of information are you looking for if you're interested in helping citizens become energy citizens? And then we had a master's project to review all the existing platforms that are there. So already in the joint problem framing, you see it's a mixture of interviewing, talking, discussions, workshops, and also research in the joint problem framing. Then the second step is, how do we co-create this knowledge? Well, we had a series, so we developed a mock-up, like a fake website. And we presented this at several conferences, one of which is the Smart City Conference. And in those conferences, we gathered a lot of policymakers, and we had them play with our platform. And they gave us feedback about how to make it more relevant for them, which parts were not important, which parts were interesting. And we also presented like a unfinished product also at the Energy Sustainability Week. So what we had to do was be very willing to show something that was unfinished. I think that's sometimes for researchers a bit difficult, but I think it's a key part of a transdisciplinary process, that you share unfinished products so that you actually give people a chance to give you feedback, so that you're actually serious about incorporating their ideas. And the third part about how we applied this knowledge is that now we have an integrated platform with existing data sources from all of our work packages. We also collect information from there's also 3 other projects that are also working on energy citizenship, and now it's going to be used by the Glasgow City Council for their decision-making on how to better support citizen engagement in their city. And also, we're going to be showcasing this to many other cities in Athens. We've talked to the mayor in Athens about this, about using this platform. It's not perfect, but the thing is, I think that we always had the intent of giving it back, giving something back, because oftentimes a problem with transdisciplinary research is you spend a lot of time with participants, with stakeholders, they get nothing back. And they think, oh, these greedy researchers, all this time, they write a paper, and then what happens to us? So I think a key part is actually the third part of when you're reintegrating and applying co-created knowledge, what are you giving people back immediately and in the long term? Not only in the long term, also at the end of the project. So I think this is something that is also difficult, I think, in the scope of many projects, but very, very, very important if you're doing transdisciplinary research. So we've talked about transdisciplinary setting, the mindset, right? And we just covered what are examples of processes and practices. So finally, I'm going to talk about transdisciplinary outputs. I'm going to talk about this in a way, again, in 3 different categories. So when we talk about outputs, what do we mean? And I'm borrowing from the really good work from ProClim that was already done in 1997, that they suggested the way we can think about transdisciplinary outputs is by categorizing them into 3 different types of knowledge. The first type of knowledge is actually, if you remember what I mentioned about mode 1 science, it matches mode 1 science. It is the what is question. What is the system? Why is the ocean blue? Why is the sky blue? Why is it, how does the climate work? All these things. So it's the information, for example, that goes into a climate model, right? The what is. The second type of knowledge is target knowledge. So that is knowledge about, okay, now that we know what the system is, where should we be aiming? This is all the important work that is going into IPCC, right? That the reports that we read about what are targets, what are danger thresholds, so a lot of the research that we do is to set targets for policymakers, right? But the third type of knowledge, which I really, I associate with transdisciplinary knowledge, is how do we get there? We're at A, we need to go to B, that's what science tells us. How do we get from A to B? And I think this is the type of knowledge that is very difficult, and traditionally, us as scientists have said, okay, that's not our job. You're the politician, you're the policymaker, I give you the information you need, you make the decision. No longer possible. Because the information we create is so complex, it's so biased, as what Rick was saying. It's so full of context that unless we take up the responsibility to translate and interpret what it is that we do develop, it's very hard for somebody else who didn't do that work to actually make sense of it in a good way, right? So the how do we get there is the controversial aspect, I would argue, of science, and also the part that transdisciplinarity is needed for, I would say. Otherwise, why do we need another category, right? That's my opinion, I would have to say. I don't think everybody agrees with that. So, taking those 3 categories of outputs, I'm going to just show you some examples of the 3 different types of outputs that we have and include, just to give you more of an idea of what do we mean by these 3 types of knowledges. So starting with the system knowledge. The system knowledge we are creating in Include is about how do we better understand energy behavior across scales. So traditionally, in each of the disciplinary silos, you understand why people use energy either from a psychological point of view as an individual, or you understand it from an economic point of view, right? How people respond to price signals. Oftentimes, you have then studies that look at energy on a large time basis, historical studies of energy use. And this is very much the technology diffusion studies, so it's like science studies, STS. And then you also have people studying energy from a social psychology point of view, right? These communities normally do not talk to each other. which means you think that energy behavior can be changed by X. But that X is only from the perspective of the individual. This is exactly going back to what Rick was saying yesterday, right? How we are limited by the boundaries set by the scale and by the concepts that we develop in each of the disciplines. So an example of how we are trying to be transdisciplinary here is linking up those scales of analysis by including, indeed, various people who look at energy, but at different scales. And so then we can create a spectrum between understanding the individual agency of energy behavior and the social construction of energy behavior, and creating one single, an integrated understanding from different points of view. And as a result, this is done by using these different methods. So we have case study analysis, we have interviews, we use frameworks from social psychology, we apply those social psychology frameworks, for example, with geographical insights, and we also use some of the modified Delphi methods. And the outputs that we have, right now you can find this online, it's on the energycitizenship.eu. It comes out as an answer to what we think is energy citizenship. That was one of their questions. And what you will find there on the web is that we come up with 4 different categories, and within each of the categories, there's different identities that we have made explicit in how people engage with energy. And that is a multi-scalar analysis. So you can read more about this online. So moving on to target knowledge. So what kinds of target knowledge are we developing? I have to say this is the more exploratory aspect of the project, but we're trying to do some things, which is we have a modeling suite in energy. So this is very much linked to the type of models that Stephanie was talking about, the integrated assessment models. We also have an integrated assessment model part of what we're doing. But what we're doing is taking the clusters, taking the typologies of the energy citizenship, and we're putting it into the models. And we're creating new scenarios and new ways of understanding the future based on our understanding of what the definition of an energy citizenship is, of an energy citizen. So in doing that, we are seeing, let's say, instead of creating scenarios that are about different types of carbon emissions, our scenarios are around what if people engage differently with each other? So what if there's different levels of trust around energy use? How would that affect our decarbonization? So how would you compare a world in which people trusted each other to share solar panels or to share a source of electricity versus a world where people do not trust each other? It's only competitive. How does that change our carbonization pathway? So that changes our paradigm of how we see scenario building. So the way that we're operationalizing this knowledge is that we're shifting how scenarios can be built based on social science insights versus policy-driven goals, right? So that's an example of how the insights from the first part of the project links into this operationalizing part. And this is, this is too small for you to see, but it shows that we're using multi-scalar also 3 or actually 4 different types of models on the left side that we're trying to link up also. So the multi-scalar approach continues with the modeling part, and it just shows some of the narratives that I was just talking about. And these narratives, for example, they have names like power to the people, band together, people to the streets, habitual creatures. These are not the usual narratives that you get in climate scenarios, right? So they're really focused on how people feel about their identities and why they do things the way they do. So I just want to, that's all you need to know. I'll skip this one. And the third type of output that we're talking about that I was making such a big deal about was the transformation knowledge. What are we doing for transformation knowledge and include? There's 2, if you just look at the yellow part, we're doing 2 things. One is we've created an Include Academy. So this idea was really to train leaders in communities all over the world to become energy citizens themselves. It became an online project. That's one of the COVID consequences. A 6-month-long leadership training program. And then we also developed this platform that I already mentioned. So just some of the images. As a result of this academy, we actually developed this book, which I wasn't able to bring so many because they're heavy, but please feel free to take the few copies I have here. It's a workbook for citizens if they are interested in starting their own initiatives in their communities. And it's really building on an integrated system and design curriculum that I also teach in the university, but it was also tested with stakeholders and citizens to see. And so this is we didn't have this when we were teaching the academy. We used the feedback from the students to help us make this. So they were the guinea pigs. And now it's the next iteration, and we're trying to build more. So now the outcome of this is that we're going to create a MOOC at Delft to upscale this course and give it to more and more people. Anyway, this is some of the skills that we're trying to translate. And a lot of these approaches is actually backed up by also our findings from the case study analysis. And also, as a part of the academy, we have 8 real-world projects that got started that wouldn't have otherwise got started. So these people, and a lot of them are from Africa, because that's where education, that's where we attracted the participants. And now these are 8 projects that we're also helping to fund as a result of them going through the methodology and then thinking of an idea that they want to pursue in the world. Another output that we have is a joint policy brief. So you remember I said that there were 3 other projects that are working on the same topic. We came together and we, with one voice, had an event where we advised the EU how they should support energy citizenship if they're serious about it in the future. That can be also found online in our, but that's a policy-specific transformation output. And the third one is this platform, where we hope it's a resource for researchers, but it's also a source we think that, maybe other people who are interested in starting projects will be inspired by. This platform, in addition to having the definition for energy citizenship, collects all of the successful and maybe not successful collective energy initiatives that we found across the EU. So the idea is that you can go and you can find where else your idea maybe has been tried. Why did it work? Why didn't it work? Because we also include what the factors are that enabled it to be successful and what hindered the project. So it's a learning and inspiration for people who are interested in doing more in the energy system. Right? So that's how we organize. There's a modeling suite, there's an energy include academy, there's a lot of our outputs about science is also included in the interactive policy platform. So, second to last slide, key takeaways. It's very simple takeaways. And maybe some of this is also my opinion. The first one is, I think for me, transdisciplinary research is a means, not an end. So, I don't believe that transdisciplinary research is the best course of action in every single circumstance. I don't think it's a panacea. I don't think it makes sense for everybody everywhere. But I think it could be very helpful if you know why you're using it. That's number one. Number two is, if you're really interested in creating transformation and usable knowledge, it really requires both an openness, so this openness to methodological approaches that maybe you are not familiar with yourself, but at the same time, an openness and a sensitivity to what people actually need. I think this is difficult for scientists because we are so enamored and so passionate about what we study and what we find is important that it's sometimes hard to open our ears and actually hear what other people have to say about what they need, right? This is difficult. This is not, yeah. So that's the second point. And the third point is, I think new spaces of interactions are where creativity can flourish. And the creativity is also what Rick was talking about. This, where can creativity be generated? And in order for us to think along the lines of transformation knowledge, we also need to, I think, get out of the university, be in spaces like this perhaps, take ourselves out of our usual routines and be able to place ourselves, have different kinds of conversations, put ourselves in uncomfortable positions possibly, and to think outside of our roles, prescribed roles. And also, finally, and this might be relevant for this point of time in your lives as well, it's always a helpful question to ask, for transdisciplinary research, but also for you personally, I mean, to ask what are the actions that are truly meaningful to you to carry out. So we just don't do things because it's been done the way they were done before. But what do you value? What do you care about? What do you find meaningful? And what is the role you must play in order to meet that value, to find that meaning? And maybe that will look very different than what things look like today. So these are just some of a few thoughts about transdisciplinarity and my project. And if you would like to join us in Brussels for our final event of this project, there's also an online portion if you can't make it to Brussels. So please register then. And we really welcome you either in person or, online. So thank you very much for your attention. Yeah. So I will just circulate this out in the crowd.
Please.
Yeah.
Bin, so many thanks for your contribution. I had the chance to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I hope we use the concept correctly at this point. And yes, please. A microphone for the after in the session. So okay, please. Just to conclude my survey, the question we move all the question at the end in the QA session. So just to say something about your talk. I loved a lot the concept of epistemic role of the stakeholder. I think that it's not so easy for everyone to grasp, right? Because normally when we speak or engage with the stakeholder, we think that everyone has an interest, self-interest, and not that a person in their daily work and role can be an epistemic human being.
I think that's a really good point, and I think it links to what Gabrielle was talking about with the indigenous communities.
Yes.
Yes, which is that it requires a measure of humility from the researchers to say, oh, our methods in the West or our methods are not the only way. I mean, it's one mental model of seeing what the world is and why it is, but there are other ways. And then we're really serious about incorporating their ideas into the way we see the world. So you have mental model A, you have mental model B, and you're really open to making mental model C. Yeah, and that is epistemic role. But if you're saying, I have mental model A, yeah, I don't want to belittle this, but it's also important. I mean, I have mental model A. I'm not really interested in changing my mental model, but I do want to make sure everybody's interests are expressed. It's more of an issue of fairness, right, and justice. Not wrong, but it's different than creating a mental model C. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So considering that we are perfectly in time, and maybe if Helena, you agree, Bin also, and Stephanie online, we can have a little break before the last presentation, the discussion. 10 minutes. Okay, you agree? Okay. Thank you. Please, we are ready to start again. One minute more. Wait for the other students. So we have the last talk of the day and the summer, the final talk.
Yes.
Our speaker is Maria Elena Guimarães.
Guimarães.
Guimarães, okay, perfect. From the Mediterranean Institute for, please silence. From the Mediterranean Institute for Agriculture, Environment and Development and Change, Universidad de Évora,
Yes.
Portugal.
Yes. Perfect.
Maria Elena Guimarães is a transdisciplinary researcher that facilitates co-production of knowledge for the definition of action that transform social ecological systems. The title of her presentation is Transdisciplinary as a Long-Term Compromise, the Montado Case Studies, Aletejo, Portugal.
Perfect.
Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will put the timing so that we keep the 45 minutes. So, hello everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation, Francesca and Salvatore, for this lovely invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. And the dinner yesterday was amazing, and now I see you all in a different light. You were all very beautiful yesterday. Congratulations. And I also would like to thank all the staff here at Cala di Balcani. They did an amazing job, and they take care of us quite well. So congratulations for this space. Yeah, very nice. So I start with a question for all these amazing students. I haven't had a chance to talk with all of you, so I would just like to ask who is working or aims to work with environmental issues? If you can raise your hand, just to have an idea. Okay. Okay. So hopefully, I think from the talks from before, it was very clear that the environmental challenges that we all face as a society, and it's really an amazing opportunity to have so many people from different backgrounds here, and I really hope that in the end of this summer school you can consider adding the environmental perspective and issues within your own interests. Because I think that's one of the biggest societal challenges that we have, and we really need a lot of effort to deal with this perhaps surviving challenge, okay? So, as Francesca said, my talk is about transdisciplinarity as a long-term compromise. I start just, as some of you have asked me, where do I come from? I bring a little map of Portugal. So our research center, the Mediterranean Institute for Agriculture, Environment and Development, is based in 3, let's say, areas. The main area is Évora, which is 1 hour from Lisbon. But we also have research groups in Beja and in Faro. That's where I am based. We also are part of an associated lab called Global Change and Sustainability Institute, and this change is more focused on policy design, okay, and policy support. And basically what MED, focus mainly on the Mediterranean region, tries to do is to develop research, and when I talk about research, we include disciplinary, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinarity approaches to deal with real-world problems. And all these approaches are used within our institute. And what we try, the different approaches that we use, always are based on this need of interaction. So feedbacks and interaction between what we develop as a research center and what society needs. And I think this can be applicable to knowledge that is developed in the different approaches to research. Another important thing to say, based on the discussions that we had yesterday and today, is that we are a research center based at the university. And in Portugal, we have two different careers. So we have the professorship career and the research career. They are two different careers. So we are part of a university, and within our research center, we have people working as professors, also doing research, and researchers also teaching in a much less percentage, and we all work together. I am part of a smaller group, which is called Labscape. It's a Mediterranean landscape system lab. And these are the people, we are around 35 people at this point, but these are the people that I work mostly with, like in teams. So we are from different fields: geography, economy, agronomy, biology, public policy, sociology, mathematics, statistics. So there's different backgrounds. And I just, before explaining a little bit our approach, I just have a slide to talk a little bit about our context. So Labscape, we consider ourselves as a very competitive group. And we also target competitive CVs. So I think I wanted to say this, not to say that we are very good, but just to highlight and to reply to some of the questions that some students did during these 2 days, that to be in academia with the system that we have now, it's very hard to not look at competition, okay? It's a competitive area. And to be competitive, you have to take care of your CV. Our finance comes from European and national projects, from an array of funding sources, but we focus on collaboration. And I think this is the key point, because sometimes we think that to be competitive, you need to be individualist, and you need to take care of your own CV, but what we put in practice in our research group is collaboration. We seek collaborations, and we normally choose to collaborate. And that's like a key characteristic of our group. We work mainly with inter and transdisciplinary approaches. We work at multiple scales, from soil health issues to policy design, and we have a long-term strategy. We share values. We discuss the values that we share, and we reflect every year on how to improve our group activities. So we have 1 day or 2 days, we call it a retreat, every year, to talk about what we have done the year before and what we want to do. Problem, okay? When you have a multidisciplinary approach, individual contributions are looking at the same problem, but there's not a lot of level of interaction. Like been already said, you have your own conceptual way of looking at the problem, but we are all looking at the same issue. When you have interdisciplinarity, then you are starting to work together, but the levels of interaction is much less than in transdisciplinarity, because you still you work collaboratively, but you still preserve somehow your own perspective. When you're working on a transdisciplinary approach, it depends a little bit on the context, but in the context that I'm talking about, it implies going beyond academia and working with people outside academia in a very collaborative and cooperative manner. So the level of interaction increases a lot. And to also talk a little bit about what Francesca was asking about this facilitation and participatory approaches. When you need to we are dealing with people from academia, outside academia, but we are dealing with people. So participatory methodologies, facilitation skills are essential to do this kind of work, because you need to deal with people. And I hope that in the next slides we will talk more about that. But what is also important to say, I think, is that doing interdisciplinary work, or TD, might not be for everyone, and that's perfectly fine. And I put here a study that I did with some other colleagues, where we interviewed several people working in inter and transdisciplinarity, and what we found is that there are some common features between these different people. They come from different backgrounds, different stories, but they all share some kind of characteristics. So in my perspective, there's a kind of a tendency for this kind of work, which can be at the beginning of your profession, of your work, or it can come later on. It doesn't. You can start as a disciplinary person, and then at a certain point you get interested in more complex questions, and you start being more interested in inter and transdisciplinary approaches. But there are some features that are common between all these people. But also I would like to highlight that if you are more into disciplinary studies, that's great. We need it so much. We need people that look into detail and in analyzing processes in a very detailed manner. We need disciplinary knowledge to be able to do transdisciplinarity. So disciplinary studies are extremely important, as well as inter and TD. So there's no better or worst, as I think it was also said during the last interventions. But what I call for is to nurture the capacity to interact and collaborate with others. That is not only important, but it's urgent. And I think this is a key issue when we are training young people starting and having a bright future. It's really important to understand that we need to nurture collaboration. The challenges that we have, we can no longer have this more individualistic approach in science. And this needs to be nurtured. It's a bit against the system that is being built up in academia at the moment. But if we don't start this change, then the change will never happen. So I just bring two other images that talks a little bit about this silo situation and also talks a bit about the difference between interests. So some people are more systematic, so they like to look very into detail to certain processes. Other people, where I fit, are more systemic. What motivates us in research is to look at linkages, is to combine different disciplines or different perspectives of academia and outside academia, and by mixing them and seeing the interactions, we develop new knowledge. All of these two approaches are extremely important, and we need much more interaction. The silo situation is what we have been talking about. Bin already used the word silo. What is silo? Silo situation is when you build up a community that feeds on itself. So we start with, let's say, a discipline or a topic, and we create a dynamic around this topic that is so active and that takes so much time that we lose time to interact with other perspectives or with other disciplines. So this is the silo situation that I think we need to find strategies to avoid as much as possible. And I think the examples that I'm bringing today is just one way, it's just one strategy to do that. So within our group, we work with transdisciplinary approaches, and we use the following ingredients. We nurture and try to develop skills in integration experts and expertise, which I will talk a little bit. We also use a framework to understand the context and interactions, and I will talk about that as well. And we also dive immediately into face-to-face and multi-stakeholder interactions. We promote dialogue. And this dialogue doesn't need to be specifically suitable for transdisciplinarity. It can be very useful for disciplinary studies as well. And what we don't fear is this interaction and the dialogue, and establishing the dialogue. I think this is extremely important. And we also have this strategic and long-term perspective, which I will talk in a bit. So let's start with this integration experts and expertise. What are they? One example. We work with soil degradation, which is a widespread sustainability problem. And to reach healthy soils, we need collective actions. I think we can make this statement clearly. So what we have social scientists, we have landowners, land managers, private companies that impact soil. We have public administration and public policymakers developing policies that impact soil health. And we have the overall society that benefits or suffers the impacts of soil degradation. So we have all these people, but who articulates, and we know that they need to work together, they need to develop collective actions, but who articulates, who promotes collective actions, and who promotes collaborations? Are we going to ask soil scientists to do that? Is it fair? Do they have time? Do they have the expertise? I don't think so. So what we are at the moment trying to formalize is something as a role that I think exists in many different settings with very different names, which are these integration experts and expertise. And I go back to the ITD Alliance, which Gabrielle also talked about yesterday, because we have a working group just focused on that. And if you're interested in the topic, I invite you to also take part of this working group. But what are integration experts and expertise? They bridge, they translate, they relate perspectives. They also generate new knowledge about the topic and the integrative process. And they also coach people about the process. So because I think I'm an aspirant of being an integrating expert, we generate new knowledge and we help others to do it. And this is a really nice paper that tries to formalize this role and also calls the academic system to acknowledge this role, which is implemented by many different people. I'm sure that in the audience there's plenty of people doing that. But they're not really acknowledged. There's no formalization of this role, and sometimes it's quite hard to go through the academic system. So these are more or less the roles that these kind of experts and expertise do. They integrate, they build bridges, they cross boundaries, they translate, they catalyze, they facilitate this issue of facilitation, which I think facilitation is an extremely important skill, but it's not just that. We have, there's a lot of training on facilitation for many different issues. I think they're extremely important if you want to develop these kind of skills. But as a researcher within academia, you cannot just facilitate. You need to have also the role of the contributor. You are develop science, you are trying to pose questions and reply to questions. So facilitating is not enough. But all these different roles, they exist. Of course, we are not building up a superman or woman. So this means that these roles, they are not developed simultaneously and all the time. Sometimes you have a role, sometimes you have another role, and sometimes you have teams with different roles. Okay, so you don't need to work individually. So I have a question for you. Which within your own context and interests, which roles would be more important in your own context? And to reply to this question, I will give you 5 minutes, and I would like to ask all the students to make groups of 6 people. So you just have to, like for instance, you just have to turn around, just gather in 6, and just discuss a little bit these roles, and try to figure it out what would be the most important role in your own context. Is it clear? Yes? Let's go. 5 minutes. Hop, hop, hop. I know it's a hard day, but it's...
5 minutes.
You will be good. You'll be good. After these 5 minutes, one of the persons in the group will reply, okay, to me. Yeah. Is there a microphone? Yeah. One more minute, okay? Okay, I'm sorry, but I will have to break the discussion for time reasons. But I would like to hear a bit some of your replies. So if someone wants to just say one or two roles, or what were the discussions that you had in between yourselves, who wants to start? Come on, come on. It's the last day. Okay. Thank you.
Well, in their own way, they're all important. So it's very hard to decide.
Between one.
Yeah.
All of them are important in your perspective.
I'll say what reflects my figure, in my opinion. I see me as a translator and also a bit of a mediator, because these two figures are in a way complementary. Okay, so the same person, I think, could cover both these roles.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I see myself in these two roles because in my field of studies, I study different disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
Not in a very deep way. If we take, I don't know, a chemist.
So you combine different disciplines. So you don't go into the disciplines, but you try to see the connections between the different disciplines.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what environmental scientists
is about.
do.
Okay, great, thank you.
So if we are people that are very sectorialized,
Mm-hmm.
we can communicate to each other and make them communicate
Between themselves.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. Is there any other reply? A different one? Yeah.
So in our field, actually, it depends.
Which is medicine,
yeah,
I know.
Which is medicine. It really depends. Like we have to make a distinction between research and working in a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Because, for example, for research,
Yeah, for research, obviously, we think that the right role is the contributor. So a person who contributes intellectually to science with his research, with his experiments. Whereas in hospital, we
Like, yeah, in a hospital, maybe we thought about evaluators because, like, the head physician and the head nurse need to combine all the people to work together, and heal the people. Fortunately, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. What we mean with these different roles is that either an individual or a group of individuals can take up these different roles. So I would say that as a researcher, for sure, you are contributing. That's research is developing new knowledge or discussing knowledge. But what integration experts try to do is not only contribute to science, but help bridge, integrate different perspectives, help others develop this kind of contributions. So just to clarify that as a researcher, you can have these different roles as well.
Okay.
You don't have to be only thinking about
Okay.
your scientific contribution, and you can also be having these other types of roles. A little bit like in environmental science, where you need to, somehow you feel like you need to translate some of the knowledge to some sectors, make them communicate to arrive to certain results. There's another reply there, yeah?
So good morning, and thank you for this interesting activity. It was nice and funny to discuss together about the most important roles on the screen. And we all agreed on the fact that the bridge builders would be the most important role among them, because we all come from different towns and we all study different subjects. So we are engineers, we study physics, philosophy, literature, languages. And so we according to our point of view, it's important to establish relations between us, first of all. And then secondly, also the role, the figure of the catalyst would be considered important, because we should combine, we should add our personal point of view, our perspective. Mm-hmm. And in the end, also the role of the evaluator would be also really relevant, according to our opinion, since we have, as I've already said, different perspectives. So according to our knowledge, we should all add our personal point of view.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your contributions. I'd have to move on. I would really like to hear a little bit what you discussed there, but because of time restrictions, we'll move on. But yes, I think it's interesting to understand that these roles, they have different purposes, they have different importances. In some contexts, they might be more important than in others, and also in a moment in time. So we move on to the second ingredient I talked about in the beginning. So it's the social ecological perspective, which I think that, of course, I come from the environmental science as well. So I work with natural resource management, and we, as a research group, also we work a lot on that. So for us, this social ecological perspective is quite important. And to talk about that, I bring the woman who won the Nobel Prize in Economy until now, the only woman, I believe, Elinor Armstrong. No? There was others before? After, yeah. So she was the first to win the Nobel Prize of Economy with this work of governing the commons. And I think what I wrote here is, it was talked about in different ways during these 2 days. And I think I admire a lot her work and her smile. I think she was a very smiley person. Which is always good. But she strongly believes that the research question should drive the methods employed and not the discipline or the person asking the question. And I think this is a key, let's say, idea about inter and transdisciplinarity. And I think that, I just wanted to bring you this statement because it connects a lot with what we have talked about, and I don't think I need to give more details. But one of the things that was one of the last works that she did, which is the social ecological system framework that I bring to you here, because this is a framework that we use to help us contextualize the problems that we are looking at. So the social ecological system framework has several layers of information. The first layer is on the right side of the screen, and it talks about how resource systems, resource units, governance systems, and actors all interact, and by these interactions there are some specific outcomes. This is the first layer of the framework. In the second layer, within each of these subsystems, Armstrong provides a list of variables that should be considered when you're trying to understand a sustainability problem. And not all the variables might be interesting for a specific context, but what I think is extremely interesting from this framework is that it promotes interdisciplinary approaches. It promotes interdisciplinary thinking, because by trying to understand within your own problem how these variables, what are the state of these variables, you are forced of getting a little bit out of your own perspective and trying to understand what we know about the topic in other perspectives and in other disciplines. So for instance, in one of the papers I have here, I applied this to the Montado, and I applied this as soon as I started working in the Montado system, which I will talk about a little bit later. And this framework is very important to me, because it kind of guided the literature review that I had to do to understand the problem I was going to be working on. So perhaps this could also be a framework that that can be helpful for you when you're trying to understand the context you're going to work on. Another important thing about this social ecological perspective is that you might start with what might be a very linear question of research, and the social ecological perspective and this framework promotes a thinking about interactions. And for me, that is a key knowledge gap in research at the moment. We are not very used to talk about interactions and try to understand interactions. And I think that's the hot topic. The big effort that we need to do is what are the relevant interactions? What interactions don't exist and need to exist between these different subsystems in order for us to go towards a sustainability pathway? And how these interactions affect the problem at stake. So yes, so this is kind of a framework that we use, which puts us in the mindset that I think is needed to understand complex and very large issues. And then the last ingredient that I've talked about in the beginning is this face-to-face dialogue and this long-term perspective. And to explain how we look at these issues, I will use a case study, which is the Montado. So, when you normally open a bottle of wine, a good bottle of wine, you have cork, right? The cork comes from this system. It's called the Montado in Portugal. It's called the Dehesas in Spain. It covers around 1.2 million hectares in the southern region of Portugal, where our university is based. And in Spain, it's around 3 million hectares. It is a very complex agro-silvopastoral system. Why is that? Why is it complex? Because in the same area, you have agriculture happening, you have forestry happening, you have pastoralism happening, or livestock production, okay? All in the same space, which implies a very, let's say, intricate and complex way of managing this system. But it's not just spatial and functional complex. It has multiple uses. It's a high nature value farming system, and it has an increased societal demand because of the environmental issues that we are dealing with. And in the Mediterranean region, in this region, in the Algarve region, We are facing a lot of challenges with climate change, and this might be one of the systems that is more resilient to climate change. So it's really something that we need to take care of. And actually, I added this slide yesterday because we have UNESCO people in the audience as well, and there is an application of the Montado to UNESCO Heritage. And there's also this movie that came out a few years ago that tries to illustrate the importance of the Montado. So I invite you to see the movie as well, which has very, very nice pictures of this system. But in reality, what happens is that as other silvopastoral systems in the world, the Montado is significantly declining. So studies within our research center shows that we are losing around 5,000 hectares per year of the Montado. What happens in the Montado is that we lose trees. So trees get older or they are sick and they start dying. So we start having more open Montado systems until this last situation, which is the A, where you have open fields with no trees. And when you reach this level of decline, it's very, very difficult to go back, because young trees to survive, they need the oldest trees to survive as well. So this explains a little bit the decline, and it also explains why this sustainability problem is very hard to tackle, because this process of decline is very silent. It's not from one day to another. It takes around 5 to 10 to 15 years until a farmer that has the Montado understands that it has a problem because the trees are dying. It's a slow process. So Armstrong says that when you have a sustainability problem and there's an urgency, people react because it's urgent. You feel the problem and you want to change something. In the Montado, the challenge is that this urgency is not clear to everyone because it's a silent decline. And what our studies also show is that even when farmers are very aware of the problem in the Montado that they are managing, they live in a very tense context, because they want to. It's a heritage that they have and they have to protect. They know that, but they still need to do a living of it, and they still need, and a big part of their economic return comes from the Common Agricultural Policy. So they need to balance what they think is important to what gives them money. So this tension makes them live in quite a harsh conflict. And what we found is that they are missing consistent orientation, strategic guidance. The policies are very controversial. Some policies promote, let's say, intensive livestock production. Intensive livestock production in the Montado makes the trees get sick, for instance. And they are searching for supportive dialogue, and they are also spread in a very wide territory, which makes, let's say, collective actions quite difficult. So how do we deal with this tension as researchers focusing on the Montado? And we have been focusing on the Montado for the last 20 years in approaches that go from disciplinary to TD approaches. And you have seen these diagrams before, and I also let's say, present another definition of transdisciplinarity. But I think I won't spend too much time in explaining this definition because we have talked a little bit about all of this before. But what I want to say here is that the examples that I'm going to present in the last minutes, I don't think they can be applicable to any issue, okay? And as other speakers said before, we don't need transdisciplinary approaches for everything. Okay, so the slides that I showed you, the importance of the Montado and the problems that we have in the Montado justify the fact that we are investing in this kind of approaches. So the kind of approaches that I'm going to show you now, they make sense to topics that are extremely important, that are complex, and that require this kind of approaches, okay? So what have we done? So in 2016, and until today, so around 8 years, coming to 9 years, we developed a dialogue platform, which we call Tertúlias do Montado. Tertúlias in Portuguese and Spain is a very known concept about socialization. So people In the older times, they would, more intellectual people, right? They would go to cafes to discuss topics on arts, on political, on science. It was like a community of discussion. So we thought about implementing this concept of socialization between different knowledges on the Montado. So we developed what we call Tertúlias de Montado, which is a long-term, it is based on the transdisciplinarity principles that gladly the other speakers have talked about. And it addresses the contemporary decline of the Montado agro-civil pastoral systems. Until today, we have developed 38 tertulias, so sessions, and more or less 300 participants have participated. We also have a WhatsApp group of 120 people, and these 120 people, it's very interesting, it's quite an active WhatsApp group. They share a lot of pictures, they share news, and I think this socialization through WhatsApp, it's very interesting because people by sharing their pictures, they share a little bit about themselves, so it's quite a good way of creating some linkages and connections and social interactions. So there is a blog about the initiative, and where we publicize all the tertulias, and we also report on each tertulia. So each session has a report, and people can see, everyone can see what has happened in that session. What I want to highlight as well, this is made by a research center, so this is also an experiment, okay? So this is an experimental field. We monitor what's going on in this dialogue platform, we collect data, we analyze data, we evaluate, okay? And we also, in 2023, got an award, a People's Choice Award on an effort of universities to engage with communities. But this slide is just to highlight that although this is a very practical work, it is an experimental site, as our colleagues from forestry developed 20 years of these trees. For instance, in the Montado, they live 150 years. So in order to have some results, you need to have plots of 20 years to find some results. So I think that in transdisciplinarity, we also need long-term experiments to understand what's going on when you're trying to promote this kind of dialogue. So that's what we're trying to promote. And what is our hypothesis? And it links a lot with what Bin says. So for me, transdisciplinarity implies a mindset that we don't have. As Bin said, we don't naturally have a mindset to work in a transdisciplinarity way. So what we do with the participatory methods, with skilled facilitation, and in these tertulias do Montado, is that we try to go from a very standard way of communication, and communication is what I'm trying to do now. I'm trying to find the best way for you to understand what I have in my mind, that's communication. We want to go beyond communication, we want to establish dialogue. And to establish dialogue, we need to establish active listening. And active listening is when you have the capacity not only to be able to explain your perspective, but to hear the perspective of others and work with that perspective in your own mind and build up something, as Bin said, that is different, okay? So that's active listening. And in my perspective, active listening is not something that we can achieve in a project of 3 years with 2 or 3 workshops. It's quite difficult. So it's a mindset that needs to be nurtured, that needs to be developed, not only by researchers, but by the society. Society needs to understand how science works, science needs to understand how society works. And that's what we're trying to implement with this 8-year initiative. In Tertulias do Montado, we have researchers, we have landowners, we have farmers, we have public administration, policy makers, students, all of them interact in these tertulias. Framing this within the research process of transdisciplinarity, I think what we have is a constant problem framing platform, okay? So what we do there is discuss different topics, different issues in the Montado, and from this discussion, some of the results go to problem analysis, so we have new research projects that are built up because they were discussed in tertulias, because we found that this is important and needs to be further discussed, further analyzed. So we build up research, new research projects. On the other hand, we have research projects that are at the phase of problem analysis or exploring impacts that come to tertulias to show the results and to also pose new questions. So it's this interactive, let's say, process that we establish with tertulias do Montado. And let's say, what are the outcomes of this, okay? So one of the things that I think so why Tertulias de Montado lasts for 8 years? I always say Tertulias lasts as long as there's participants. We have an average of 30 participants per session. And until we have 30 participants or 20 participants per session, Tertulias will continue. So we don't know when Tertulias will finish, when this initiative will finish. In 2019, we collected some monitoring data, so we collected some information about what's going on in this process. And I have several, the paper shows a little bit of the results that we achieved, but one of the outcomes, so several outcomes are highlighted by the people that participate in tertulias. New knowledge, they attain new contacts, they gain trust with other people. They develop concrete actions, they create new networks, and they also reduce conflict that existed before. So this is the kind of outcomes that people that participate in the initiative identified. But one of the most nice results that we have is that 40% out of 100 replies that we got, so at that time it was around 200, the total population, so 200 participants in 2019. And 45% of 100 said that they developed concrete actions. And for us, this is really motivates us to go on. So it means that from this dialogue, people are motivated to change, to make something. And this is quite rewarding for those that are developing this. And I just leave you with 2 more examples of consequences. So this dialogue has consequences. It's not just about dialogue. We try to build up something from this dialogue. One of the consequences is training for farmers. We started in 2018 with training about the health of the Montado. We now go to the 5th edition. We never thought it would be something that was so important, but in the end we found that there's always new people in different regions that need this kind of training. And this kind of training, you can say it's not at all transdisciplinarity. It's very we have a team of trainers that come from the professors and researchers from several universities. We build up this training as a system approach. So we look at the Montado as a system, and we provide some training for them. So just to say that even when you're developing transdisciplinarity, there are moments where actions can be very disciplinary as well, and they are quite important. A final example of consequences is the fact that we started working on policy design, and at the moment in Portugal, we are the first research center that is scientifically coordinating a policy measure. Nobody knows probably about agro-environmental schemes. I'm not going to go into detail. But from the discussions that we have, we realize that a big problem in the Montado is policy design. So we proposed what we called a result-based model for the Montado. We proposed this to the Portuguese government, and the Portuguese government accepted to include this in the new Common Agriculture Policy implementation in Portugal. And there are papers that explain a little bit what we have done, but just to leave you a little bit of an idea of implementation, as Francesca was asking us to do, to develop this model for the Montado, we created what we call a transdisciplinary arena, where different actors have different roles. So we have the research team that develops the work. We have the public policy makers and the public administration that tries to understand what we are doing, how is it applicable in the policy, how can it be applicable. Farmers and Farmers Association look at it and tells us and discuss with us, how can is this useful, how can it be useful, and how can farmers want to participate on it. And then we have external experts, which are not part of our team, but their expertise, and most of them are very disciplinary people, this knowledge really needs to be integrated. So they also are invited to step in. And we work with farming practices, policies, and also governance. At this moment, we are working with 184 farmers. Oh, sorry. 2 last slides. Oui. Okay. So this result-based model is being implemented in around 6,500 hectares of the Montado until 2027, and it includes 184 farmers that are working with us to try to. What we are trying to do is to improve the ecological status of the Montado. So the farmers are paid every year if they reach environmental results in the Montado. And we have a system to monitor and to evaluate if each farmer are delivering environmental results. But I won't get into this detail, but I just wanted to highlight the kind of initiatives that can start by having this possibility of developing a long-term dialogue that evolves a long time and along the issues. So as concluding remarks, I think what I suggest is that sustainability problems in different contexts should require holistic approaches and should benefit or could benefit from this social ecological systems perspective. That stakeholder engagement and transdisciplinary approaches should be explored, engaging people needs to be coupled with a systemic understanding of the context that shapes their decision and finding the leverage points that can induce change. And finally, this is a long-term process based on increasing mutual trust between academy and society. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Very interesting, the work we are doing in your territory. It's a huge work. I think that when in the Puglia region with the Xylella disease, I think we are very close to that situation, and maybe the Montado model could be a useful framework to consider for us. Of course, before open the question session, I think that from your talk we can add other keywords to the discussion today. So assuming this type of approach would mean working in teams, search for collaboration, and having a long-term perspective, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. But I have a curiosity in your case. Sorry if I get the privilege to ask the first question to the speaker.
You deserve it, you deserve it.
Thank you. In your case, is there an engine?
An engine?
Yes.
An engine? How
of the Montado, this Montado model, mm-hmm. The implementation, of course. Is there an engine? Who is the engine? I think that it is necessary to have an engine in order to actually have this long-term perspective. Mm. Is the university the engine of this joint framing of and solving of the problem, or someone else?
You didn't see all my slides, did you?
No.
Okay, sorry. Anyway, so I wanted to just go back to the team, but I think there's some kind of problem with the. So just to show you. Well. So just to say that when we started, so the engine, I think there is an engine, but the engine is not a person. It's a team.
A team, okay.
It's impossible to do this kind
At
of
the
work.
university, in their role.
So the university and our research center supports this initiative and provides resources to do this initiative. As a key aspect that I forgot to say is that this initiative is free of project. It's not financed by a specific project. It goes beyond that. So it's internal resources.
The mission.
It's part of the mission. It's part of the strategy of MED. But I think the person that also provides this long-term perspective and very strategic perspective is Teresa Pinto Correia, which is this beautiful lady over there. She's our leader group, and she always nurtured this long-term and strategic perspective. We need to know, why are we doing something today? Why is that? Where do we want to achieve? And we use this thinking as well to understand. As I said, we are competitive, we have a lot of projects, but we are not just focused on delivering the outcomes of the projects, but we are focusing on, we have resources with the projects, how can we develop the projects that we have to develop and have a line of thoughts, have a line of work. So sometimes we take some resources from the projects to something that doesn't have a lot of resources at this moment, but we know that is important. That's a kind of perspective. But I think that the engine, sometimes it's more one person, sometimes it's another person, but I think the key issue is that we need to work with teams. We need to work as much as possible, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we can open the Q&A session. Federica Iaconeta, please come here. Prego. So we have also Stephanie online.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Please, Federica.
So I have two questions for Maria Helena. Okay. So the first question, you are actually partially answered already. But I want to deepen this concept, this issue. So my question is, how do you ensure that the diverse perspective of various stakeholders are effectively integrated into the transdisciplinary research process?
So I think that we fail a lot of times. Okay, we fail to do it a lot of times. But because there's a continuation, we are able to, let's say, to adapt and to learn from the mistakes and to try and be more integrative later on. So, and also, I think there's also a limitation to participation, right? Sometimes we need some kind of expert knowledge, and we cannot force people to participate, and that's a limitation of this kind of approaches. If people don't participate, sometimes very technical knowledge is missing to understand the overall picture, because people choose not to participate. There's of course other ways to overcome these challenges, like the translator role, trying to look at the published papers and try to build up on that, but it's always it's not the same thing as having the people that are developing this kind of knowledge in the table. So it's an imperfect system for sure.
Yeah, thank. You've been very clear. Yeah. The second question is, in your opinion, what are the key lessons learned from the Tertulias Domontado initiative that could be applied to other sustainability projects?
I think that one of the things that when we started was, and we talk about a little bit about that, is this stakeholder fatigue, and that we need to also, we cannot ask people to participate all the time, they get tired and that. And what Tertulias has proven is that that's not the case. If I didn't explain a lot of the architecture of the Tertulias, but what we discuss in this dialogue platform is defined by the participants. So they are the ones that define what we are discussing, when do we finish this discussion and move to another one. So there's the promoters, they are there to facilitate, but they don't decide anything. The decision is made at the platform. And I think this was a key to success, and this is a key to success in other contexts, is to really give the initiative the power to decide and to evolve as the group wants to evolve. I think this is key, and it might explain the fact that we are going to the 9th year, and our participation rate and new people are always coming in, and I don't see it ending quite soon. So there's no stakeholder fatigue. There's people coming in and out because of the topics as well. Some topics don't interest everyone. And some people have other issues and other places to be. But yeah, one of the things that we have proven is that stakeholder fatigue might exist when it's perhaps a top-down approach and things are decided not by the people that are asked to participate. So yeah, maybe that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks to all the speakers who had their talk yesterday and always today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mohamed, please. Mohamed Dafiouni.
Hello, my name is Mohamed Afiouni. It's a pleasure to be here. My question will be to Ben Pierce. I have a couple of questions to ask. My first question is, in a world in which technology is constantly evolving, the energy consumption due to those technology is constantly increasing. And as an IT engineer, I would like to ask you, how and in what ways is Include future-proofing its interventions, adapting its approach to be responsive to the rapidly evolving technological landscape, such as the emergence of decentralized energy systems, blockchain-based applications, and edge computing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much. Let me think about this. So we, just first on a practical level, the project ends in the end of September this year. So our goal is really to produce information, knowledge that other projects can build on eventually. And 3 years, it was just a three years and 4 months project. It's such a, talk about the long-term projects, it's such a small amount of time. So I think we were very, to be honest with you, short-term sighted. I mean, really, we have these objectives and we need to accomplish them in a certain amount of time. That being said, I think maybe the thing that we did that most relates to what you're asking about in terms of adapting to the future is that a lot of our data is based on case studies that we go into communities to find out about what they're doing in terms of collective energy initiatives. And indeed, we learn a lot about how they're approaching the future. So, for example, in our case studies, we have a collection of energy communities, and all these energy communities believe in decentralization as the future vision for the energy system. And they use a range of different technologies, mostly PVs and wind technologies, into the future. And many of them have been around for up to 20 years, and they seem like they're going strong and they're going to continue into the future. And a lot of these communities are very practical. Like, it has to work financially, which means they have to keep on adapting. So a lot of these communities, for example, are looking into battery storage as the next iteration of what they're doing. They're looking to how they can connect to the grid, you know, and how can they help motivate their local systems to upgrade the grid, how they can work with their district system operators to align what they're doing to what the system overall is doing. So they've become advocates, for example, for system change. That's one thing. And the other thing is they really are, there's one example in which we studied where a community in Switzerland is actually using blockchain for the heating transition. So I think what we see is that people on the ground are adapting to the future. It's not that we as a project would actually discover anything that then we would tell to communities about, hey, this is how you adapt better to the future. But it's actually making, I think the value of the project maybe is just to make clear and actually make it more public and make it more widely known what people are already doing that's very, very innovative. And they're innovative because they have a very clear value in what they want to achieve. They have a very clear goal. It either works or it doesn't work. And so in many times they are much more pragmatic and actually adaptive to what policies are there, what regulations, what incentives are there, than researchers who come in and study them and who make suggestions much later on. So the researchers move slowly, more slowly, than people who are actually needing to get things done. So.
Thank you so much for the answer that I love very much because it actually prepares the floor for my second question, which
good.
is like what lessons is include learning from other transdisciplinary initiatives around the world, like for example the German Your Balcony Network Energy Creates Community Project or the Institute of Technology of Karlsruhe, or for example like the Asian Pacific Network for Global Change Research that are tackling similar challenges of enabling energy transition, and on the other hand how it include on its part sharing its own innovative practices globally.
Okay, so two questions. One is how are we learning from other initiatives? Well, I think we're very modest and we know we can't get insights from all the other initiatives that are going on. So our modest efforts is to link up with the three other projects that I was telling you about that are going on, Energy Prospects, Dialogues, and also a project called EC Squared. And because we're all actually studying the same topic, we thought it would be helpful to bring all those insights around. And we also do look at, we try to make the case studies as broad as possible, but let's just say this small set of results that we gotten for these 4 projects, we realized there are 3 main challenges that stand in the way of the energy transition. And this we found over 32,000 citizens that across all of the 4 projects that we talked to. We tried to gather some of these results of surveys and interviews and things. And we found 3 major challenges that's true everywhere that we've gone to in these 4 projects. Number 1 is people are not acting in the energy transition because they say, why me? So it's a fairness issue. It's my costs are going up. I see my neighbor down the street who's much richer than I am, and they're benefiting from solar panels. I have nothing. So why me? Number 2, the challenge is, why should I trust? So given that you being the government, you were pretty much kind of wrong about COVID much of the time. You're not totally straightforward with us, with many of the things, predictions, and I don't really understand what the models are saying. It's a bit of a black box. Your decisions, I'm not sure if you have my best interest in mind, especially this division of scale of governance between the EU and local governance. People, in the Netherlands is a good example, people don't feel like whatever the governments say that have the local communities in mind, so they don't trust. And then the third challenge is that people say, okay, let's say I believe that this is what I should do something about it, and I trust you, but there's still a third challenge, and the third challenge is, am I actually able to act in the way that you tell me to act? Am I capable? Are you helping me be capable? So I know all the things I should do, but you don't give me the tools, you don't give me the money, you don't give me the structure, and you make it very hard. So I try to do something, I feel like I should, but I can't. So these three challenges of fairness, perceived fairness, of trust, and perceived efficacy stand in the way of a lot of citizens' actions across multiple projects that we've now seen. Your last question about international global things, I think we tried to do that through the Include Academy and the platform, which, and also going forwards, we want to continue the educational co-creation academy that we created, and we want to continue to offer it to more and more people. So we hope that from the educational perspective, we want to give a set of tools that's in the book that would allow people to develop leadership capacities that would give them the sense of self-efficacy that links to the last point I talked to you about. At least we can address one of these three big challenges, which is we would like people to believe and also see how even they're just one person, that it still matters that they do something. But to be smart about what it is that they do so they can link it back up to the system. And I think that is our approach. It's very individual, bottom-up approach to change. And we think that through education, if people's own education is at stake, they see that, hey, I can benefit personally from my mental development, then that will move them to learn skills and methods for creating change. So our insight was really shifting between, why people would get involved.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your answer, and I would also like to thank all those who collaborated to make this summer school happen. Thank you so much, and
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Other questions, comments? No one? You are tired? You want to conclude the discussion? So thank you, Bimbin, thank you, Elena, thank you, Stephanie, for your talk, for your contributions. I hope that this collaboration will continue. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
I kindly ask... sorry? Okay, sorry. Okay, I kindly ask the Isufi director to join, so to conclude, okay?
Just a few words to conclude, because it's time for lunch. I would like just to thank all the speakers. Thank you very much for the high qualified contribution you presented at our students. I would like to thank the staff of the Cala dei Balcani, starting from the director. Please, Modesto. I thank the staff of Cala dei Balcani that gets us in this wonderful place for 2 days. Thank you, director, and thank you for all your staff. Thanks to the scientific committee of the Isufi Summer Excellence School, and in particular give my thanks to the present members of the scientific committee, Francesca, Adriana, Gianluca, thank you very much. Thank you to the organizing staff. I would like just to applaud for the beautiful work to Andrea, Anna Maria, Giovanni, Maria Chiara, Mattia, Patrizia, Sara, Davide, and all the technical staff. Applaud, please. Thank you very much. To conclude, I would like just to express my hope that this is just the first step for a lot of collaboration with all the members that participated to this school, and as a first step, we are planning a publication. We are planning to collect the contribution presented here in a volume, probably published by Routledge. Okay? So thank you very much, and now go to the lunch. Okay?